Hey everyone, Jay here with Texas Star Landworks, and by request, we're going to do a short video on ponds, and they're called a lot of different things. They're called tanks and ponds and lakes for the folks that move from up north down here, but we refer to them as ponds, and there's really no right nomenclature for them. You call them what you want, and you just go from there, really. So I think addressing some of the very top questions that we have about ponds is pretty much what we want to do, what we want to cover on this video, and it's going to be really simple. So we put together kind of a list of, I think, 6 or 7 questions that are really hot buttons for people that are exploring ponds and doing those types of things. So number one, and these are no certain order. Number one is what size is best, and that's really relative to what you're going to use it for. Man, I want to tell you, like, anything big is great, anything small is great, right? It really just depends on what you want to do. We've done them, that have been 100-foot diameter all the way up to acre and a half, 2 acres, right? Which are sizable ponds, but at the same token, we really just kind of adhere to what our customers want to do. As far as size, like, take these things into consideration: size of your land, your water availability. That's a big key, and what you're going to use it for. Is it livestock, or is it for fishing or fun or play? That all goes into what size is best. Where do you put ponds? That's the next question. And again, relative to your land. 100% of the reason why we do an on-site consultation with anyone is we have to see the structure of the land. Like, satellite doesn't tell the truth for us. We can get some stuff off satellite. We can get where the tributaries and the creeks and the pond, the other ponds are in the area. But at very minimum, we want to be out at your project, at your land, understanding the structure of the land. So where to put them? Always near water, right? So if we've got a good tributary creek or even a spring, that's where we're going to put our pond, right? Somewhere where the outflow of the pond, when it overruns or it floods, doesn't bother anything downstream, like a structure or maybe a neighbor or maybe a highway or something of that nature. But where you put pond is all relative, again, to your land, your situation, where you are, codes. If you have codes, if you live within a city limits, which we've done plenty of ponds within city limits, all it takes is permits. It is relative to what you do. Next question, I guess more of a statement, is, can I dig a hole and it'll hold water? Sure. You can dig a hole and it'll hold water for a little bit, right? You may get really lucky and it may hold water for a while. But a lot of the ponds that you see in Central Texas, that it's just that somebody dug a hole. It held water through a rainy season, and right now, it's a dry hole, and they start putting brush and stuff in it, and that it becomes like this big wasteland, which is kind of unsightly and unfortunate. But this is why I primarily tell people is, you really can't dig a hole and expect it to hold water. Ponds are constructed, they're engineered, and you have to understand, what are all the elements you have to take in place for a pond to be a pond and not just a hole, or another place where you put brush. And there's ways to make sure that that ponds hold water. And that's the next question, is like, how do I ensure my pond holds water, right? There's only really one way, and we'll cover the other 2 ways that are not insured. And a lot of people in Texas are fortunate enough to be able to do this. But I always tell customers this: number one, best case scenario is we come out, we dig test holes, we find the right subsoil, and we go to dig, and we're able to use the clay that is available below the surface on your property to secure and to solidify your pond, right? That is best case scenario, is that you already have the materials on site when we go to excavate your pond, right? That is best case scenario, and that is our hope and dream for every single one of our customers. And really, we go into it eyes wide open. Number 2 is, let's say we get down to the substructure and we're just not finding what we like, to say, hey, this is something that we can feel really good about holding water. Again, not a guarantee, but it makes us feel better saying that, hey, if we truck in, this type of clay, or we add bentonite, or we add soda ash to this mix because we feel that you have the right kind of clay, it just needs some help. We'll do all the ribbon testing and all the things that we need to do in order to see if that clay is going to hold and what we do. At the end of the day, that is kind of phase two. Really is like, if you don't have the soil available, we truck in soil, or we buy bentonite or do things like that. And again, these things are additional costs to the excavation, right? Excavation is just a very, very small portion of building a pond, right? I feel like most people get hung up on that. The third phase, and it is a surefire way to make sure that your pond holds water, is liners. We do a lot of liners. I think we do more liners probably than any other business around Central Texas. At least that's what our distributors tell us. And liners are a really good way to just defeat, some of the soil problems we have here in Central Texas. You have a lot of rocky, porous soil. We have the caliche, we have the bedrock limestone. And don't fall for the misnomer that rock holds water. Oh, we'll dig down to the rock and that's where we'll stop. And that's where no, rock is porous. It doesn't matter what kind of rock it is. All rock is porous and it does not hold water. And the rock in Central Texas, which is limestone, absolutely does not hold water. It's a great filter, but it just does not hold water. So don't believe that if somebody's telling you, hey, we'll dig down and we'll find rock and that's where it'll be. A liner is a great tool. It really is. If you'll think of it, it's more like a swimming pool. Swimming pool use concrete or in some cases fiberglass or even vinyl. Some on the above ground pools. Think of a pond liner of that. And making sure that you can ensure that you have a body of water for a certain amount of time. So there's warranties that are associated with those from 10 years all the way up to 20 years depending on the liner and how it's covered, and we can discuss that more with you. They are a bit more costly, but again, surefire way. If number one and number two doesn't work, we always have a third option that we know that we can drop a liner in a pond and make it hold. How deep should it be? And that's really a question we get a whole lot. And again, it's not a deflection, but it is relative to the use of the pond, right? So, hey, I only have room for a 150 foot diameter pond, but I want it 20 feet deep, and I have cows, and I want my cows to have plenty of water. Well, your cows will have plenty of water, but you'll also be fishing cows out of your pond, because anything over 2-to-1 slope is just not for livestock. They fall in, they can't get out, right? This happens a lot. You see a lot of the ponds out there that were dug, and you got a real deep pond that may have held water, but at the same time you're at the cost of your own livestock. Depth is relative again, right? If you're wanting to use your pond to fish in, 10 to 15 feet is great. That'll get the fish to where they're healthy. They understand the migration patterns of, hey, it's summertime, we need to get down to cool water. Hey, it's wintertime, we need to get down to the warmer water. They need to preserve. Anything less than 10 foot, sometimes in some cases 8 foot, depending on the coverage and the vegetation, the fish are okay. But we really recommend, that 12 foot area for fish, and really it's because of the sediment buildup and the natural, it's kind of the shrinking of the pond that happens over decades, right? That's about all we can say on how deep it should be. I mean, it's relative size. The deeper you go, the bigger your pond has to get in circumference, right? You can dig a hole straight down, but most of modern machinery is 20 foot from the foot, from where the track's set. So, for instance, our machinery, like, we just don't dig any further than 20 feet, from the foot. That's just kind of a standard thing. What are the elements of a pond? And people always ask this question, and it's real simple. There's 3, maybe 4 really good elements to a pond that I can explain without getting too in depth on like the engineering and everything that goes behind it. I would say I would say the number one is water source, right? Sometimes we have to manufacture that water source, or we have to redirect inflow, which is completely possible and part of our packages and the project. I would say that, a good 60% of the time, we typically are able to harvest water off of runoff and land and natural places that water already is. So that's kind of one of our goals, is we'll be able to look from a view and say, hey, we can get water into the pond this way. Because that's what a pond is. If you'll think of it as a creek, and you widen an area of a creek, and then you dam it off, you essentially create an outflow, which brings me to the next point, is a dam, a good dam. So that's relative to how deep you want the pond, right? So all dams look different. Like some ponds you don't think have a dam rarely do have a dam, right? It's just the water level is a little different. And we can pull the water level to really wherever we want to with a little bit of excavation help and some really good laser measurement and understanding where that water flow is going to hit. And the third element I like to talk about is outflow, and it's one that we don't see a lot on these homemade ponds, is outflow. And people lose good ponds, right? If you don't have a healthy outflow somewhere where erosion isn't going to break down a dam or the backside of a dam, you will lose your pond over time. We fix them all the time. I always tell customers 60% of our pond building business is fixing ponds. The other 40% is new construction, because people already have holes in the ground. They just want them to be ponds. So they've done some excavation and done all that. So those are the three elements I really like to talk about without spending too much time on that. How long does it take to build a pond? That's another question, and it really depends on what's under the soil, right? So it's a mystery until we get into it. It's why we dig test holes when we want and when we need to. We need to find rock. If we find rock, obviously it slows us down a little bit, but it's definitely not a no-go for us, right? We have equipment and machinery that make quick work of rock, and we live in Central Texas, so that's just part of life here. So it's really relative to size, depth, and kind of the scope of the project, really. And lastly, is what everybody wants to know is, how much does it cost to build a pond? And man, I wish I had a sticker that I could put on, everybody's pond and say, this is exactly, what your pond would cost, or I had a calculator or something. But the fact remains is that's just not a possibility, right? We bid projects, right? So we're going to tell you what we're going to dig your pond for, and we're going to do everything in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 that we can possible. We're going to give you all the outcomes and what it looks like, and we're going to talk to you about it all the way through. But just know that ponds are on the same scale. Just think of it this: if you're building a swimming pool, right? If you're building a good in-ground swimming pool, your budget needs to be between $80,000 and $120,000 to have a really good swimming pool, right? I'm not saying that a pond is going to cost you between $80,000 and $120,000, but if you want a good-sized pond that actually has all the elements of a pond and it is engineered correctly, that's a good budget, right? So if you've got a half acre to an acre and you want to make sure that you've got all the bases covered, having a budget in mind of building a swimming pool is a really good place to start, right? To prepare yourself. Now, could it be cheaper? Absolutely. If we find the right elements in the soil and we're like, yep, we'll try this first and it holds, great. You've got a pond, and you call us back and say, hey, it's not holding. So we come back and we add some more elements to the pond. Maybe that gets to hold, and then, maybe down the road we have to put a liner in it. But whatever it is, we're there for the life cycle of the project. We're not just going to dig you a hole and say adios. We're going to make sure that you have that pond and it just fulfills every dream and hope that you had of a pond, right? So a good rule of thumb here, right? We've dug ponds that are 100 feet in diameter and, up to 1.5 to 2 acres, right? And everything in between. And I would say this, a pond that we're going to dig you, if it's, 100 foot in diameter, it's going to start between the $15,000 and $20,000 realm, because we take everything into consideration to make sure that this thing is going to be what it is, right? We're going to tell you where to place it. There's a lot of consultation that goes on there. There's a lot of understanding of the substructure of the soil and what is the probability of this thing actually, performing and being a pond. We're not just going to dig a hole, right? So we take all those things in. So, I mean, if you're going to start a pond, good thing to have is a budget of somewhere between 15 and 20,000 bucks to start. And if it's anything less than that, you could probably find somebody to dig you a great hole, and you may get really, really lucky, and that hole holds water for years to come. But the likelihood of that, you can just drive around and look on the side of the roads. That typically doesn't happen. Like, you see a lot of holes that were ponds or dreams of ponds or anything like that. It's not a high probability that if you dig a hole, water will hold. You know, it just doesn't work like that. So like I said, a good budget is just, you dive into it, excuse the pun, like you would build an actual swimming pool. So having that type of budget, we're going to give you all of what you need to know. Best case scenario, worst case scenario. We'll bid the project as a project. That way our feet are held to the fire on performing and making sure that you get what you're paying for. So hope this helps. I mean, it's going to answer some questions, and I know there's a lot of relative terms in there, but we'd love to be able to answer your questions further. And that next step is actually getting with us and discussing your project. So hit us up below. You'll find a link to one of our landing pages where you can get in touch with one of our salespeople and even talk about, you know, your project a little bit. And we'd love to come out and see you and do your pond. Again, Jay with Texas Star Landworks, and have a great day.